Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, occasionally agents about their writing and about their work, about publishing, everything else that goes along with this crazy business. And hopefully, they will share some of their great insights and experiences with you, should you be interested in your own writing, which is, I hope, the reason that you're here. Before I introduce my guest, please take a moment and hit the subscribe button, whether you're on YouTube or one of the major podcast platforms. That makes sure you don't miss any future episodes. It also helps folks when they find the show, which is always great. Another thing that helps folks find the show is if you would be so kind as to do one of two things, or maybe both. Leave a nice review, and if you really like the show, tell a friend. That is really the best way for shows like mine to build an audience. Just tell somebody, hey, I really like this show. Maybe you should check it out. Again, we're on YouTube and we are on every major podcast platform. Rich Eisen is me, the open mic, writers in their own words. So, anyway, enough of the commercial. Let me get on with it because I met my guest today a while back at Left Coast Crime, and I think it was the one in Bellingham, Washington. She's been a lot of things in this business. She's been a magazine writer. She's been a writing tutor. She's been an editor. But really, about 10 years ago, she started writing fiction. And in that time, she's published several short stories. And then in 2023, her debut thriller novel came out, I Know What You Did, mystery slash thriller, which are really the best kind, which deals with this very fascinating premise. What if a best-selling novel comes out and it fictionalizes the death of your childhood best friend and accuses you of her murder? That's a really cool premise. Certainly one hell of a premise for us to be talking about now. So I'm really excited to welcome my guest, Cayce Osborne, to the open mic. Cayce, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely. Well, look, as I noted in the intro, I Know What You Did is your debut novel. I gave people a little bit of a thumbnail, but for those who might not be familiar, tell us a little bit more about the book.
Sure. I will also give you a visual representation so you can see what the cover looks like. I know a lot of
Yes.
people imprint on that cover. Yeah, so it is about a woman who grew up in the same town that I grew up in, Madison, Wisconsin, and got out of here as soon as she possibly could. She had lots of trauma in her childhood. She didn't like it here. She left, escaped to New York City. And she lives a nice, anonymous life in the city. She has things exactly like she wants them. She has an on-off again boyfriend who is on when she wants him to be and off when she wants him to be. And she's chugging along, coping until one day this best-selling novel comes out, purporting to be fiction, but really it follows her childhood very closely and spills all of these secrets she's been trying to outrun and forget for 30 years. So she must return to Madison and figure out who wrote this book because the author is hiding behind a pen name. And why now? Why, after all this time, are these secrets coming out?
Yeah, I mean, I love that premise. And of course, the first thing I always think of is, and I know some writers hate questions like this, and I understand why, oh, where do you get your ideas? I always say, well, open your eyes. It's all around you. But I'm always curious. And again, I'm going to preface this. My current work in progress is something loosely based on a real event. So I'm always curious what was the inspiration here? Was this, something based on something that actually happened, or is it just something out of the creative mind of Cayce Osborne that this all came from?
Sure. It was not inspired by a real event, but it was inspired by my reading, which is where I get a lot of inspiration, either just a tiny plot point or a type of character I want to try out writing or a scenario. So in this case, I had been reading both Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, who does a really cool thing in the beginning of that book. It's also a book about a book. He does a really cool thing where you start reading the novel and you think you're in the Anthony Horowitz novel, but really you're in the novel that's within the novel. And you don't find that out for a few chapters. And I was totally fooled. I loved it. I thought, this is amazing. How can I take that and sort of spin it my own way? Or what way could I use sort of the intro of a book to to draw the reader in. So, like in my case, I decided that the dedication page of this fake book within my book was going to say, I know what you did, and pretty soon everyone else will too. And as a dedication, that's very ominous. And I love that idea of sort of using something innocuous or something that a lot of writers use as a very heartfelt moment to thank teachers or parents or whoever inspired them, and sort of turning that into being very ominous.
Yeah, yeah, that's very original. Well, I was going to ask you about the book within a book format, and so now I have the understanding of how you came to use that. I'm always curious because in all of these things, and by that I mean whether it's mystery, crime fiction, literary, whatever, it always feels like there's all these rules that we're supposed to follow, right? Especially if you're not already published, right? I mean, if you're Don Winslow or Stephen King, you can do any damn thing you want to, but until
Right.
you get there, right, we always feel like we're hemmed in by these rules. And so, anytime I see, especially a debut author, do something that is a little bit outside of the norm, I'd love to get a little bit of your mindset. Were you ever concerned that maybe something like that would be a more difficult sell or have maybe confuse a reader? Or, was there anything where you said, this is maybe I should save it for my follow-up or something like that? Was there any hesitation to use that format?
Um, I don't think so. For better or for worse, I tend not to think about what will sell because if I do, then I get too much in my head about what I'm writing. I just sort of want to write what I want to write, and I have written many books that have not sold. I have drawer novels that, may or may not at some point see the light of day, and a lot of them taught me, how to write a book. And so I can't really worry too much about that. Um, I read a book called Claire DeWitt and the City of the Dead by Sarah Gran, who is one of my very favorite writers. And it breaks a lot of rules. It's almost slightly sort of supernatural, or it has this very strong thread of like fate and mysticism almost about it, and she applies that to like the detective genre. And I thought, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that you could sort of take the genre or the sort of conventions and spin them a little bit, just twist them just a little bit so that they had this new creative edge to them. And so that was really inspiring to me and sort of gave me the courage to sort of go for it. And I ended up looking at the book within the book as, so it's a first person account of this woman she's trying to keep her secrets under wraps. And so it's very much from her point of view, with all of her biases and foibles. So the chapters that are the book within the book sort of allow you to see the story from a different angle, someone else's point of view. Whether or not they're telling the truth is muddy, but still, then you sort of get two different versions of the story and gives you the whole picture.
Yeah, the whole rules thing is so, I think it's really stressful for newer writers because, everyone's trying to get an agent, everyone's trying to get, or maybe if they're not going that route, they're trying to figure out, what is the thing that's going to get me through this invisible wall that we're all climbing like a Marine Corps, boot
Mhm.
camp. And so that's it's an interesting thing though, because I love to hear when writers say, I just decided to write the thing I want to write, because ultimately, virtually every writer I've talked to, and for this show it's been hundreds, ultimately comes to that conclusion. I'm just going to write the dang book I want to write,
Yep.
and we'll see where it lands. And you mentioned something I was going to ask, so let me follow up on that, which is, all that said, you noted you have a lot of books in the drawer or manuscripts in the drawer that didn't go. I think all of us have that too. I'm I might be getting close with the one my agent's trying to sell now, given it's been out there for
Good.
so long. Um, you know, Tell me a little bit about that process. How many do you think you have? And as you noted, it helped you learn how to write. What were some of the things you learned in that process of writing these manuscripts that ultimately are just sitting there in the drawer right now?
Yeah. So I started writing around 2016 after I had had both of my kids, and I was sort of looking for something that was more for myself. And so the journey overall has been very much a roller coaster. And I'll say the one thing I learned is that the only thing you can control is the writing. And so your mind and your anxiety want to focus on the agent search, the publisher search, the marketing and promotion stuff. But you cannot control any of that. You can work toward it, but you have zero control. So the one thing you do have control over is the writing, the quality of the writing, what you're writing, how you want to approach whatever your genre or your story is. And so I have to keep reminding myself of that over and over. The first novel I ever wrote was a YA sci-fi adventure, and that actually got me an agent. The first novel I'd ever wrote got me an agent, and I thought, wow, this it's not easy, but it's working. The process is working, right? We sent it out to a few publishers, and in between that round and the next round of, adjusting and resubmitting, she quit the business. So I lost my agent and I was back to square one. So then I wrote sort of what they call women's fiction. I will just call it fiction novel. And then another more sci-fi mysterious one. Neither of those sold. Then I wrote another fiction novel that got me my second agent. And she was fantastic and enthusiastic, and I loved her, and she sent it all over the place. It didn't sell. Then I wrote, I know what you did. And I really felt like something had finally clicked, like mystery, suspense, that space is where I'm supposed to be. Very excitedly sent it to my agent. She said, I'm not feeling it.
Oh
And
my.
yeah. And so her level of enthusiasm did not match my level of enthusiasm, which I mean, she signed me based on an entirely different style of book, so I understand. But then I had to make the decision: do I stick with the agent or do I believe in my book? And so we very amicably parted ways, and I started submitting it to new agents. Got a decent amount of interest, but no yeses. And then I thought, I've had two agents, I have zero books. Maybe I should just try submitting to a few publishers who will take it from me. And that's when it finally clicked.
Yeah, I love that story. I don't love how long it took you, but I mean, I
Yeah.
love because I think if you're one of the things when I talk to people, and if anyone's listening to the show has heard me say this before, I think one of the things you have to that I learned the hard way is you really have to know what you want out of something in this
Mhm.
business. If the only thing that's going to make you happy is, a traditional Big Five publication and a big New York agent, great. Great. That's almost impossibly difficult to do. It's attainable, but it's really hard. If you just want to write whatever and you don't want to get it edited, you just want to self-publish, you can do that too. And there's a million things in between, but you have to know what it is you want to do and what you think about your project and whatever this particular thing is. So I hope everyone was listening to that story because that is such a great example of the resiliency that you have to have when you do this if you want to do something commercial.
Yep.
That's really great. I have to ask though, and it's funny too, I'm also on my third agent, so I understand.
Yeah.
The first one turned out to be a complete dud. The second one was great, but I was doing nonfiction then, and when I moved to fiction, he dropped fiction entirely, so he doesn't even. So I had to, lost
Yep.
that one.
Yep.
And now I've got a really good agent. She reps a lot of people you and I both know, but
Mhm.
we're still struggling. So we'll see what
Yep.
happens. But it is a process that you just have to. And you have to be stubborn. I think as a
Yes.
mule. Mm.
Yes, and you really, again, if you love the writing and you have this desire, dream, goal, whatever you want to call it, of holding a physical book in your hands that you wrote, that is actually in bookstores. Like that was my thing. A lot of people self-publish these days. They have huge success, but it is very difficult to get a self-published novel into bookstores. And
Right.
that was really my dream. I want to see my book on the library shelf. I want to see my book in the bookstores. And so that meant a certain type of publisher that has the distribution to reach all of those places.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Yeah, again, it goes back to, what do you want to see? And you gotta, bet on yourself.
Yep.
Um, I also talk with writers a lot about the need to craft a really good first line.
Mm,
And so I wanted to ask you because I think that's um, also applicable. The concept is applicable to an entire opening scene.
hmm
And in I Know What You Did, you open up things with your protagonist at the gynecologist's office.
Yes.
And I'm fairly sure that's got to be unique. So please tell me a little bit about the thinking and setting up that scene and what you wanted to accomplish with that.
Sure. Well, so my main character is my age. She is very different from me in almost every respect. And so I made her my age and had her grow up where I grew up because I wanted to ground her in something that I felt solid in because I was going on such a limb, out on such a limb with all of her other characteristics. And I have a fantastic gynecologist that I love. She delivered both of my children, but that is her focus, is delivering children, and I'm not having children anymore. So often when I make an appointment at her office, I get shunted off to a sub, which I understand. She's at the hospital delivering babies. She doesn't, this is just my yearly checkup. And so it was like a little moment of frustration. Like I wish I wasn't, getting shunted off to the substitute gynecologist. And so that was in my brain, and I was looking for a moment in the beginning of the book because some people would call my main character unlikable. I was looking for a moment, whether you want to call it a save the cat moment in sort of writing craft parlance, or just a moment that would get the reader on her side. I wanted something that would be maybe familiar or relatable to female readers and funny perhaps to male readers. And so I had her open. So the opening line is substitute gynecologists are the worst. And so I wanted to sort of kick it off a little bit of humor, a little bit of an endearing moment, and how she's sort of having to deal with this rather unpleasant male gynecologist that has sort of swooped in because her regular is unavailable.
Well, I love that because also I'm a fan of humor in mystery, thriller, crime. And there's lots of types of humor, and so I always find that to be an appealing thing to me. That'll get my attention uh, pretty quickly. Um, you use humor a lot, and so I'm just always curious, is that a natural part of your writing? Is that something you had to sit around and think about a little bit about how you wanted to incorporate that? Just tell me a little bit about humor in your work.
Yeah, I love to bring, I'm not like I don't usually create sort of these heightened situations or have sort of slapsticky moments. That's kind of not the humor I'm most interested in. It's more humor through character. I love a strong voice in a character, and so I like when their voice and their sort of way of seeing the world brings out these humorous moments that people will either laugh at or relate to or both. So that's always my goal. And it's something that is peppered in early drafts, and then as I'm finalizing the book and really looking at the character, comes in very much at the end, and I sort of dial it up and down to sort of match the tone I'm looking for. And you don't want too much humor in a mystery because it
Yeah.
sort of let deflates all the tension and the stakes a little bit if everything's a joke. But again, someone's way of looking at a situation or thinking or what they might say in an awkward moment is how I like to bring the humor in. I like that balance.
I often think of my wife, who's an engineer, and she, over the course of our many, many years together, I have laughed at a lot of things she said that she did not think was funny at all. She just has that way of saying something sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's her engineer brain working. And sometimes it could be very inappropriate for the moment or just said in a way. And she says, always gets so angry at me when I start laughing. I'm like, I'm sorry, but that was the funniest thing I've heard today.
hmm
So, humor is very subjective. It's a tough one. You never know what's going to strike somebody as funny.
True.
Um, so you mentioned that your protagonist can be a little bit unlikable. And it's funny, interesting, because so I was reading a lot of the reviews for the book. And so your protagonist, Petal Wozniewski, um, definitely not a Laura Petrie type. I mean, she's
No.
kind of grumpy, a little selfish,
Yep.
Definitely snarky, can be brusque, all of those things that, as you know, sometimes can be a little unlikable.
Yep.
Um, Tell me a little bit how you developed her and how you find that line where you need that character to be at least likable enough that people don't just get so, not offended, but so put off by her that they don't want to read any more about her. They still
Right.
empathize with her a little bit and want to learn more about her. So tell me a little bit about the development of that character.
Yeah. Well, two things. She had a really rough childhood. I'm not going to give away anything specific, but just things happened and made her not be able to trust people very easily. Sort of everyone she loves, dies, sort of. And so she's built this shell, right? It's a protective thing. Um, and so I wanted people who are like that, they are not always pleasant to be around. So I wanted it to feel authentic. Someone who's gone through that would have to really be very well adjusted to not have some sort of reaction. And I also wanted her to have an arc. I wanted the events in this book as she finally faces some of the things that happened to her. I wanted her to be able to grow. And so I needed to sort of to take her from instead of 0 to 30, maybe 30 back down to 20 throughout. She gets softer as it goes. She sheds some of her vices. She finally faces things that she's been putting off. And so um, I didn't really, I mean, I like an unlikable character sometimes. In fact, I argue about unlikable. You know, it's, it's often applied to women characters, first of all,
Yeah.
not men. And I think men are given a lot more leeway to be curmudgeonly. That's kind of the word I use to describe her. I like it, number one, because it's never really used to describe women. So I like to put it on her. And I think it does describe sort of that set in her ways, sort of pushes everything else off so she doesn't have to deal with it mentality.
That is so true. God, there's so much latent sexism in all media. I mean, that is definitely one thing I completely agree with that, the way male characters are described and accepted is often so different than for women. Women cannot ever really be the way men are and be, you know. Anyway, I won't get off on that tangent, but
Yeah, that's
I
a whole
did
other
want to
tangent. Yeah.
I wanted to ask your opinion on something here because I actually have a theory that I want your feedback on. And it's that I feel like all stories are in some way or another about redemption. And that as a reader, we want to see flawed characters. We want to see characters who are not, Pollyanna in any way. And especially in mystery and crime and thrillers, because we want them to have redemption in some way or to redeem themselves in some way.
Yeah.
Am I onto something or am I just full of shit here? What's your
No,
thought?
I think you're right. Absolutely. I'm trying to think about how it applies across genres, but certainly it applies in the genres we're discussing. If everyone is perfect in the beginning, it's boring. I mean, I guess they could get worse, but as I don't know how satisfying that would be if you end up with someone who's worse than they started. Maybe in a series you could explore that, but um, yeah, I mean, I think I think it's the heart of it is you want to root for somebody. I want to root for main character. I also have read some of my reviews, and there is a large spectrum of people how they feel about Petal. They love her, they love her snarkiness. They hate it. They couldn't finish, and I've been thinking about this. I think some readers really want to relate to the main character in a very personal way. They want this character to react the way they would in certain situations because it feels more real and authentic to them and their own experiences. But then I think there's another category of reader who wants to be surprised and wants a character to do crazy things or weird things or things that you would never do yourself because it helps you learn about the world and it helps you see things from someone else's perspective. So I think depending on what kind of reader you are, I think yes, definitely that redemption arc helps you root for the character and it's embedded even when you don't notice in a lot of stories.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I thought, oh, that's really true because nobody wanted the Man with No Name or Harry Callahan or Billy Money to be different. They want Clint to kill everybody, all the bad guys, no matter how stereotypical and awful those things are. Um, but they wanted they wanted Marlon Brando's character Terry Malloy and On the Waterfront to get redeemed, right? So I don't think anybody that really loved Clint Eastwood movies would probably really love On the Waterfront. I think
Yeah.
I'm just thinking this now as we're talking about this, you want there's some expectations, I guess, for all writers and excuse me, all readers and
Mm.
absorbers of creative works. And along those lines, I also wanted to ask you about the role empathy plays in your writing. Um, you know, Maybe it's a subconscious thing, or maybe not. How would you describe the role that empathy plays in your writing, either as a writer or in how you infuse it into your characters?
Yeah. Um, so the question makes me think of sort of the flashback or the book within the book elements in my story, because that takes place when the character is 14. She's just lost her parents and she moves in with her aunt. And her aunt's goal basically is like to get this girl through high school. She's been through this, she lost both of her parents at once. You know, I, Her aunt's like, oh, that's my goal. I'm going to get this girl through high school in one piece. Um, and as she goes through that freshman year of high school, she meets these two other girls, and that's the heart of sort of the friendship story. And one of them ends up dying, which that's not a spoiler. We know this because of the blurb and everything. And so there's lots of moments of being the new kid and making friends, and there's sort of a rich poor dynamic going on between them that's awkward, and um, just sort of those human moments of making connections when you most need connections. And I think the adult version of Petal has really blocked any of those connections, even with her boyfriend, not wanting to allow herself to be empathetic and vulnerable and human. She needs to sort of be superhuman or anti-human and sort of not feel those feelings anymore. So that was one thing that was important to me in her journey, as even though she starts out as not empathetic within herself and not empathetic, like other people would not necessarily feel empathetic toward her because of the way she acts. By the end, I want those things to be reversed.
Sure. You mentioned reading some reviews, and again, I was reading a lot of the reviews as I was preparing for this. And as some are really positive.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but I think we all know, every writer knows that, I mean, God, in this day and age, Hemingway, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, none of them would get all positive
No.
reviews, right? That's just not how humans work. How do you deal with reviews? Because you sound like you have a good perspective on them. So I'm curious, do you read all of them? Do you only read the good ones, only the bad ones? I mean, what's your perspective on taking in the reviews of your work?
So I am curious always. I want to know, especially this is my first novel. It's out there. How are people? Do they like the writing? Do they like the care? What do they like? What do they not like? I want to learn. I want to know. I can't not know. So yes, I do read them. Um, my background is in journalism and graphic design, and so those careers set me up to really take criticism. It was painful to get to the place where you can accept it well, but I think I am there. Um, there are always going to be those reviews that you think are unfair for one reason or another. And I do get occasionally upset by something that seems mean-spirited or
Yeah.
nitpicky as a reason to not like the whole book. But as a reader, I know, I read constantly, and I know there are certain things that will happen in books that will turn me off. So I also understand
Yeah.
why that happens and how it happens. And so I would rather know than not know. And if something gives me a bad moment, I'll just have that bad moment. And something I enjoy doing is I think of a book that I really love. I think it is maybe one of the best books ever written, and I look up that book and I read bad reviews about that book
That's a
because
great
it just gives
idea.
me a little perspective.
That is a great idea.
Yeah.
That is a really good. I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good idea. And that's yeah. With um, sometimes when I'm feeling as a reporter and editor for the last 30 some odd years, I also can be somewhat cynical about the world. And I've been known to say that, I think the opposable thumb and the big brain is wasted on the human animal. But I don't feel that way all the time. But sometimes, yeah, when people are giving you flack over something, you're just like, and especially with the internet, the internet was supposed to be a great thing, and it is more than, but and we're in a day and age where you can say, hey, I really like cats, and you'll get 100 people going, oh, you're against dogs then? Oh, you're a dog hater. You
Yeah.
can't win, so you can't let it beat you up inside because they're
Right.
going to come, right? You're going to get those people no matter what you do, right? So,
Yeah.
um, really quick, I want to ask about your short stories because
Yeah.
I've read some of your short stories. They're really good. What draws you to the format? Maybe just give me a little bit of the nickel tour of how
Yeah.
you approach short stories.
Well, that's what got me writing fiction. I wrote fiction when I was younger in high school and college. I majored in journalism, but I took creative writing courses because that's what I loved. Um, I, did an internship at a newspaper when I was a senior in college and realized very quickly that I did not want to be a newspaper journalist. I wanted a little more creative. I wanted to be able to use my creativity more than the newspaper format allows. And I did eventually find my way to magazine journalism, which I could write profiles and features and things like that that sort of scratched that itch. But then after a while, I was doing more graphic design than I was writing, and I that itch returned. And so I started doing prompted contests for a fee, usually these days probably around $50. You can enter a contest and then you will be given a genre, sometimes an object, sometimes a character, sometimes a setting, and then you have a very short period of time to write that story and then it goes into a competition um, of among thousands of people. And that really got me thinking about genres, what I wanted to write, what I enjoyed writing, what I didn't. I got assigned rom-com once, and I thought, oh, this is gonna be rough. And then I had so much fun writing it. I thought, okay, so maybe not romance, but comedy for sure. And so it let me try out all these things. And then I was left with all these stories. And so I started submitting them to literary journals and then also seeking out calls, like themed submission calls for a story about the environment or this or that. And so even though I do write novels more now than stories, occasionally something will spark and I'll want to try. When we were at the Seattle area left coast crime, they did a tie-in anthology, a charity anthology, and it just needed to be crime fiction set in Seattle. And I lived in Seattle for a couple of years after college, and I thought, oh, great, that will be fun. And so I set it, back during when the Space Needle was erected during the what do they call it? The World's Exposition, I think. They didn't
Yeah.
call it the World's Fair. But so it was sort of a gumshoe PI story set back then. So yeah, I mean, I do less shorts now, but every once in a while there'll be something that makes me want to pause the novels and give it a try.
Well, one that I don't know if it's out yet or it's one that you're working on. So I'm going to backtrack to a very
Yeah.
brief story. Many years ago, I was in San Diego for a conference talking with an agent. All the stuff I was doing at that time was nonfiction. So I was talking to an agent about a project I was working on. She wasn't terribly interested in it, to be honest, but she said, well, what are you working on anything else? And I said, well, I'm not working on it yet, but I had this idea um, about writing a series of short stories based on songs by the Rolling Stones. And she said, that's a really great idea. You really should do that. Because I'm not the smartest guy that ever lived, I did not do that. I kept pursuing the other project, which ultimately went nowhere. And now, of course, there are gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of, anthologies put out based on
Yeah.
the songs of fill in the blank, everything. I mean, when I saw the Go-Go's one, I went, oh, for Christ's sake, now we've almost jumped the shark here. Not that I am taking credit for this. I am not. What I'm saying is I completely missed the boat. When an agent tells you, hey, that's a good idea,
Yeah.
you should do that, get over yourself and do that thing. That's probably a good idea. What I understand is that you are writing a short story for an anthology based on the music of Elton John and Bernie Taupin,
Yep.
who are probably my two favorite. Elton, one of the biggest Elton John fans in the history of the earth, and so when I saw that, I went, oh,
Yeah.
I had one of those moments. And one of my favorite songs, Midnight Creeper.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Oh
yes.
my God, yeah.
That's the one
So
I chose. Yeah.
you do have to tell me at least a little bit about this so I can be making sure I get a pre-order in.
Yeah, so it's Down and Out Books, I believe, and the editor is Dawn Barkley. And there was a call put out. So the Left Coast Crime Anthology was published by Down and Out Books. And so then once you sort of get in, they'll send you new calls for new anthologies they're doing. And so I saw that one, and it came at just the right moment. I was sort of in between novels, taking a little break, letting some beta readers read and awaiting their feedback. And I thought, oh, I'll just look through the list of songs, because you had to claim your song first and then submit, and then you may or may not be chosen for the anthology. And so I looked down the list and I came upon the title Midnight Creeper, which is a song I did not know. I've listened to it many times since then, but it was not one I was familiar with. And just reading the lyrics really got my mind going. And so, yes, I decided to write about the seed of the inspiration was a story my grandma told me. Her brother had polio when they were children. And so he was quarantined in his own house. And so the story takes place during the Great Depression. This family quarantined in the house, and because their father was working outside the home when the quarantine order was given, he could not go home. So it was a mother and two children trapped in this house. The neighbors sort of staying away from them because of the polio, they were afraid of it. And so that's sort of I sort of took that tiny seed and spun it into something creepy happens at midnight with that family.
Well, I love that. That's yeah, that's I love that whole album. It's don't shoot me. I'm only the piano player, but I think I had every one from 11770 until oh, Too Low for Zero was the last one of his albums I bought, but I've read his biography, I've read Bernie's biography. It's great stuff. I'm a big fan. So
Nice.
anyway, uh,
I enjoy Elton John as well, them as a partnership, but I really love Brandy Carlisle. And so I've been
yes.
enjoying their new album together.
That you know what? I'm really glad you reminded me of that too, because yes, so I've listened to two or three of the cuts off that, and it's just great. He's done some collaborations I would not have expected. Leon Russell and that kind of thing. But the and Brandy is such a big fan. I mean, the PBS special they did honoring Elton and Bernie,
Hmm.
where she did Madman Across the Water, which she's covered for a long time, but doing it on that show, God, she's fantastic. I
She is.
absolutely love her work. So,
Yeah.
and she's a great producer. She produces a few different acts that I also really like, the Secret Sisters and some
Yeah.
others. So, yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Her autobiography is great if you're interested.
oh,
And
I have not read. I'm really getting into biographies and autobiographies of late. I read so much crime fiction. I think I needed a break given the circumstances of the world. I needed something that wasn't
yeah.
about crime. And so I said, okay, I just read Mike Campbell's biography about his time in Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I just read Nico Case's autobiography, which was fantastic. So yes, I didn't even realize Brandy had one. I will
I
get
think it's
it.
called Broken Horses. And I did it on audio because she reads it and she also sings on it, and it was
Oh,
fantastic.
oh, good, good.
Yeah.
God, see, look at all the tips you get when you tune into the open mic. You get so much more than just writing.
Yeah.
So,
You get me talking
uh,
about books and I could go for hours. So
I'm with you. Well, look, I don't want to keep you forever. I do want to, well, really quick, one
yeah.
more serious question. Really, What's next? What are you working on?
Mm.
What anything we can expect to see other than the anthology, which we just talked about? What else you got going on?
Yeah, so I have a completed book I'm trying to sell right now. Again, without an agent. And so it's that, sort of back to square one with that side of things. But I am right now working on a book I'm really excited about. I've always wanted to try a PI novel. So that's what I'm doing. She's a female PI in Madison, where I live, where I Know What You Did is set. And it is partially inspired by a famous bombing that took place in Madison in the 70s
Oh,
um, in protest of the Vietnam War. And so I'm not going a war direction with it. I'm doing my own thing, but the seed of this is a protest bombing that really occurred here in Madison.
interesting. Well, I will be keeping an ear to the ground to see how things progress there.
Yeah.
So when we come to the end, I always like to end on a question that is meant to be fun. I hope it's fun. I'm going to give you, let's just say I have the omnipotent power to put you together with one of the following three people. You can choose
Hmm.
one of them to get together with for dinner, drinks, whatever you want, long conversation about writing or anything else. Um, who would you choose and why?
Okay.
Is the question. The options I'm going to give you, and there is some connective tissue between these three. You will probably figure it out quickly, but if not, I'll reveal at the end. The options I'm going to give you are the late great comedian Chris Farley, the famous or slash infamous Cato Kalin,
Hmm.
or the great artist Georgia O'Keeffe. One
Hmm.
of those three I can connect you with, and you can just chat to your heart's content. Who would you choose and why?
That's a good question. I could have such different conversations with each of them. I'm gonna eliminate Cato. I don't think we'd have a whole lot to talk about. Um, I'm gonna go with Chris Farley because I mean they're all from Wisconsin near me-ish, but Chris was a Madison guy, and so I think we could have lots of good conversations reminiscing about Madison of old. And I am a huge Saturday Night Live fan. I've read books. I've watched, probably every episode that exists. My cast, as they call it, that I grew up on, mostly was like the Chris, the Adam Sandler, the Mike Myers, era. Chris is buried here in Madison, and I've been to his grave, and so I think probably that's why I choose. Yeah.
Well, and you got the theme, which those are all Wisconsin natives. And
Hmm.
we don't think of it because we associate Georgia O'Keeffe so much with the Northwest.
Yep.
And I've been to her ranch and gone horseback riding at her ranch, all that kind of thing. But she's a
Hmm.
native Wisconsinite,
Yep.
as Chris Farley. And I didn't realize Cato was
Yeah,
until,
I don't know where he's from. I know Georgia was from Sun Prairie, which is just to the east of Madison.
yeah, yeah. I'm,
Yep.
I'm, I'm glad you rejected that one. I try to throw one in there that seems not so obvious. So
Yeah. Curveball's
anyway,
always good.
Cayce Osborne, thank you so much for coming on the open
Yeah.
mic, Writers in Their Own Words. I always enjoy talking about writers' works and their thought process and what goes into, being a creative person, especially now because we are so deeply ensconced in the business end of everything in this day
Yep.
and age. But, it's so great to hear, um, how a career is progressing in this day and age. So really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
For all you out there, I'll remind you one more time. If you haven't hit subscribe, whether you're on YouTube or on listening to the podcast, please do so. It really does help folks find the show. Also, if you would share it with a friend, that'd be great. If you really want to do everyone a solid, look up Casey's book and buy a copy because that's always great. We'd love to see you do that. Look for her short stories. That's also great. And then do me one more solid, which is to remember. Tomorrow's not promised to any of us, so whatever you do, make today count. For my guest, Cayce Osborne, and myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. I will see you next time.